Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Eruvin. We are up to Perikei Mishnah Hey. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilun Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbayev and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam Began Eden, Amen. The Mishnah continues the rule for measuring a city's tichum. It begins with the law of who is allowed to measure it. En modedin elamina mumche. Measurement of the tichum is accepted only from an expert at measuring land, which the commentaries explain. Only an expert may measure the tchum, and he must be skilled in measuring land and know the laws of measuring the tchum. The Mishnah discusses what to do if two measurements of the tchum do not agree. If he measured the tchum farther at one point and closer at another point, meaning when he measured the tchum from one corner of the city and measured it again from the opposite corner, which the commentators do point out is the right way to measure, because we can then draw a line from one marker to the other to mark the entire tchum of that side. But in this situation where he did it, and one of the markers was farther out than the other, as brought down in the diagram in the elucidated art scroll notes, whoever can see the diagram, Shomin lamakom sharibad. The Mishnah says we accept the measurement at the point where it came out farther, and the tchum for that entire side of the city extends to that point, which the Rav explains. We assume that the closer measurement came about because the measurers did not pull the rope out to its full length. Likewise, riba le'echad umi'et le'acher. If different people measure the tchum along the same line, and for one the tchum was farther, and for another it was closer, shomin lamrubeh, we accept the farther measurement as accurate. The Mishnah now teaches who is believed to tell us where the tichum ends. Afilu eved, afilu shivcha ne'emanin lomar ad kan tchum Shabbat. Even a Canaanite slave and even a Canaanite maidservant who are usually not accepted as witnesses, as the Mishnah tells us in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, chapter 1, Mishnah 8, they're believed to say the Shabbat tichum reaches until here, which the commentators explain that they are believed to say that expert measurers had marked the end of the tchum at that point, or that people had always walked to that point on Shabbat, in which case we can assume that measurers of an earlier generation had marked it as the end of the tchum. However, the Biur Halacha writes in Or Chaim chapter 399, Biur Halacha number 11, Dibur Matchil Adkan, that slaves may not be the ones who measure the tchum, since this must be done by experts. The Mishnah now explains the reason for all the leniencies that we just stated. The leniencies in this Mishnah are because the rabbis did not say, when they established the matter of tichumin, that in cases of doubt we have to be strict. Rather, we are allowed to be lenient. And since the institution of tichum is a rabbinic enactment, the rabbis do not require us to be strict in cases of doubt or testimony. And that is the end of Mishnah Hey. Mishnah Vav now briefly moves away from the topic of a city's tichum and discusses the law of making one shitufei mivuot for the entire city. Now, a shitufei mivuot permits carrying from courtyards to alleys. Now, in theory, all the streets in a properly enclosed city, for example, a city with a wall around it, can be joined in one shitufei mivuot, which would permit carrying anywhere in the city. However, the rabbis were concerned that people seeing this might think that it's permitted to carry even in a public domain. The rabbis therefore decreed that any city whose streets might be confused with the public domain must leave some part of the city out of its shitufei mivuot in order that carrying be forbidden in some part of the city. And in this way, people will remember that it's forbidden to carry in a public domain. Now, our Mishnah illustrates this rule. Ir shel yachid v'na'asat shel rabim. If a city that used to be owned by one person now became the property of many people, which the commentators explain, one person used to own the whole city and rent out its houses, and he then sold them. Me'arvin et kula. We may make one shituf, one eruv for the whole city. Now, although the Mishnah speaks of an eruv, it really means in this case shitufei mivuot. Now, even though it is now owned by many, people will not confuse its streets with the public domain, because it began as a city owned by one person, which does not have a public domain. Now, the commentaries explain in a walled city, owned by one person, none of the streets can be considered a public domain, even if they are used by many people, even if they're open at both ends, and even if they're 16 amot wide. Now, since people do not think of the streets as a Reshut HaRabim, there is no reason to stop them from making one shituf for all of it. Now, such a city keeps its status even if its houses are later sold to many people, provided that the original owner still has some rights in it, such as an ownership of its streets, which causes people to continue to think of it as a private city. Now, the streets are not actually a Reshut HaRabim because the city is completely enclosed, like we explained. The Mishnah continues, V'shel Rabim v'na'aset shel Yachid. On the other hand, if a city used to be owned by many people and it now became the property of one person, which the Rashba explains everyone sold their houses to a single individual, its streets might still be thought of as a public domain since it began as a city owned by many. Therefore, en me'arvin et kulah, ele im ken asa chutza lah. We may not make one eruv for the entire city unless we make an exclusion from the eruv. כי עיר חדשה שביהודה שיש בה 50 דיורים דברי רבי יהודה. Rabbi Yehuda says that its size is at least like that of the town of Chadasha in Yehuda, which had 50 residents, which the Rav explains Chadasha was the smallest town in Yehuda. A city right next to it joined in one shituf and excluded Chadasha from it, which was enough to permit making a shituf for the entire other city. Now these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda, like we said. Rabbi Shimon Omer, however, Rabbi Shimon says, Shalosh chatzerot shel shnei batim. It is sufficient to exclude from the Eruv an area of just 3 courtyards with 2 houses in each courtyard. And the Rav writes, Psaka halacha, the Rav says, what's the Psaka halacha? What's the law? Afilu bayit echad bechatzer echad havishiu. Even one house in one courtyard is an exclusion. V'ir she'en la ela petach echad. And if you have a city that only has one entrance, bilvad, afilu hayta shel rabim, even if it was public, belonged to the public, enat tzicha shiur. It does not need to have anything left over. Again, more details to be seen explaining this, Rav. That is the Nabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.